All right, the last one we'll show you today is called the single top stitch. And it says prepare a plain seam, but this time it says press both seam allowances to one side. Set your machine for top stitching. Well, I just had my machine set for zigzag. This time I want to do a straight stitch, so I'm going to set it back to number 1. Number 1 lines up with number 1 here in the orange, and it shows a straight stitch. For top stitching, I would like to turn my stitch length a little bit longer, so I'm going to turn it to about 3 for my stitch length dial here. My stitch width dial or my needle placement dial stays about on 3. I'll move my machine over so you can see that better. It says prepare a plain seam, press the seam allowances to one side, set machine for top stitching, stitch on the right side of the fabric. So that's part of what top stitching means, is you are stitching on the top side. When I turn it over, I see which way my seam allowances go, and I turn it over and I'm going to stitch on the right side. The edge of my presser foot is going to line up with the seam here. I put my needle down, I lower, and this top stitch is a decorative stitch, and it also helps to strengthen the seam. So the edge of my presser foot is guiding along my seam line, and I don't forget to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Trim my threads. Now, when you see this, videographer, can you zoom in a little bit more? A little bit more. Okay, good. So now what you're seeing is this is the edge of the seam, and then this black thread is my top stitching. If I look on the back, here's the seam line, here's my top stitching, and look how it's holding down that seam allowance. Now this is another way you can use to make sure that your fabric won't fray when you wash it, because if it frays a little bit, it'll only fray back to that stitching line. So here's your seam, here's your top stitch line on the front. You've got one row of stitching, and if you were to stitch in a contrasting thread like we've done here, you would see it and it would look decorative. If you notice, some of your t-shirts and sweatshirts might have top stitching around the neck, around where the cuff is, and you'll see it's decorative, and it also is functional to make it a stronger seam.